We have government TD calls for cap on Ukrainian refugees as capacity has been exceeded. And we've got two different images with the same headline. Do you want to fill us in on this, Padraig?
Yeah, so Finbar was just really just a slightly humorous attempt to just highlight how the image on the left being the Examiner's image, I think, for yesterday, which shows remarks that were made by a sitting government TD in County Clare, who said that the county and the country have probably reached capacity, and they're quite proud of what they've done in that regard. But I'm making the distinction here that, like, if he wasn't from Fianna Fáil, would he probably be called a racist for coming out with that? And it reminds me of the episode of Father Ted where there was an episode with the Chinese. There was an influx of Chinese people, and he kept getting caught out in situations where he was looking and being seen as saying things that were of a racist nature, and he went to some lengths to say he wasn't. And this is something that you're seeing quite often now. People are afraid to speak. So I'll give you a quick rundown on the actual piece of material that we have there. Okay, so a government TD has said the government should cap the number of Ukrainian refugees arriving in Ireland, adding that we have now exceeded capacity. There is no shame whatsoever in us as a county and us as a country in saying we have done everything we can, Clare Deputy Cathal Crowe told Clare FM. And we want to do more, but right now capacity in terms of healthcare, transport, accommodation has not been just reached, but exceeded. Mr. Crowe said he was hugely proud of what had been done in Clare, where he said that the population is now 3% Ukrainian. Mr. Crowe said capping the number of arrivals is a sensible position. He said that there is support fatigue in Clare and fundraising has stopped. It can't be just about accommodation. There has to be health supports and other supports, he said. So what seems like a common sense kind of position has since been shot down by the government. Micheál Martin has made his views on it, that there won't be a cap. The government has come out and made that clear. It would seem like a common sense thing. Like, if you're bringing people in to a country that hasn't got the right provisions for them, what are you bringing them into? Like, they're leaving war, but you're bringing them into other hardships, and you're putting pressure into where they're going. So they have to think of the welfare of people who they're bringing in as well. It's not just a matter of how many can we fit in, but you have to have quality care for them. We're just after moving on from direct provision.
But the reality is that our cabinet's principal concern seems to be at all times their image amongst the EU jet set and the EU elite, the likes of van der Leyen, etc. And so their willingness to genuinely and wholeheartedly listen to the people of this island when it comes to their opinions about the continued intake of refugees when we don't have the capacity, and at the same time our government's baying on of war is what it appears to me they're doing, and egging it on as a part of an EU front that's encouraging the continuance of war in Eastern Europe and in Ukraine and Western Russia. And our government are failing to actually call that out and seek peace, and at the same time are incapacitating services and making it impossible for anybody, whether they're asylum seekers, whether they're people who were born in Ireland, or whether they're migrant workers or students, making it impossible for anybody and everybody to get any form of accommodation, whether it's a single B&B room for a night up to a home for a family. And it's becoming impossible. And this isn't about blaming refugees. It's about the policymakers at a national and an international level are the people that need to be blamed, I believe. And just on a final note on this particular point, we ain't seen the start of it yet. The major Ukrainian cities are talking about essentially their populations leaving the cities because of no electricity and no heating, no water services, no sanitation services into the future, in the very near future. But the reality is that they're not going to go to the countryside in Ukraine because there's even less services there. So they're going to go into the EU. And that's what's happening already. And that's what's going to expand and swell in terms of numbers. And we're actually talking about between 7 and 10 million more refugees coming into the EU over this winter, and many of them coming to Ireland. And so ultimately, everybody needs to collectively call for negotiations and an end to this war. And that means Zelensky and the Kiev regime sitting down at a table as soon as possible with the Russians to work out a peace deal. That was already done twice before with the Minsk I and Minsk II agreements, which were reneged on by the various Kiev governments, and when they militarized the situation, when they were supposed to be doing the exact opposite. So really and truly, the only way this is going to be dealt with, and the only way this is going to be addressed, where everybody can get some sort of satisfaction, is a peace deal be made between the Kiev regime and the Russian government, and it needs to happen soon. Just before I move on, Padraig, we are going to stay in the subject to a degree, but just before we move on from these headlines, do you want to make any more comment?
Just to say that if you just looked at as population increase, like if you took the whole migrant refugee element out of it, and if you just said that Ireland was going to have a spike in births, say, right, or a spike in its population, you would automatically then, as an organizer at government level, know that you would have to have infrastructure, services, and provisions for your population, and that's what we're really talking about. And not to get that confused with, like, obviously, like, there are some people that may look at it from not where people are coming from. In what I'm saying is, it's purely a provision thing, that we haven't built our country in such a way to be able to absorb this properly, the way we're set up right now.
It's a provision thing, but it's also a case that the men, women, and children of Ukraine shouldn't have to go through this.
That's
They
true as
shouldn't
well.
have to go to another country. They shouldn't have to have the politics of their land manipulated for the last 10 to 15 years to an extent that it's been brought to war, in my mind, purposely to promote a monopoly of US energy in Europe. And that's, to my mind, what this at a macro level is all about. There are other elements in it too. It's never just one agency that gets advantage in a global plan. A global plan has to, or a major plan like this, has to facilitate and give advantage to many different parties for it to succeed or to get off the ground. I think within Ireland, even the issue of refugees and asylum seekers and economic migrants, I think it really does benefit and facilitates certain agencies within the state. It facilitates what I would consider mean-fisted businesses that want to make money in any way they can from the check with the harp on it. And so they love to see things like this. There being some people, their B&Bs and their hotels being filled up with refugees rather than with tourists. So there's a lot of, I believe, hand rubbing together in that regard. I also think from an economic policy point of view, if we want to continue expanding in terms of production, economy, etc., and becoming bigger and bigger producers and consumers and providers of services, then we need more workers. And I think that a lot of this is about taking workers into the country, but it's been done in a mealy-mouthed way. It's been done in a secretive and a deceptive way. And I think a lot of people are starting to see that deceptiveness now, and they're sometimes perceiving it to be something that it may not even be. I think that's something that we might mention later on. You were speaking to Joe Mooney from East Wall. Would you like to do an intro for him?
Yeah, so look, I just looked at the rally for the Raise the Roof rally that was on there at the weekend, and I thought it was kind of very relevant what John Mooney had to say. So if you want to have a listen to that.
Okay, we'll play it and then we'll come straight back.
Our priority at the minute is to calm down what's happening in our community, and when that happens, our next priority will be to put things right in our community, because the hate and the division which has been brought into our community, and I'm saying that very clearly, that has been brought into our community. I'm going to talk about very briefly about racism, and I'm going to talk about the far right, but I'm going to choose my words carefully. It is not my job to stand here and excuse what anybody else has said or done, and I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to make excuses for it, and I'm not going to try and explain it away. People have to answer for their own words and actions. But also, I'm not standing here as a mudguard or to provide cover for a minister who is making a mess of this process. Somebody posted during the week about East Wall being a racist community. It's not a racist community. Up to Wednesday 2 weeks ago, there was no organised racists in East Wall. There was no far-right activity in East Wall. There wasn't going to be. They wouldn't have got an audience. Nobody wanted them. Nobody was interested in them. This week, major players on the far right and agitators for racial hate have got a hearing in our community. They got a hearing in our community because the minister opened the door to let them in, they snuck in, and our job is going to be to have to get them out. It's not going to be easy. Now, something we've heard a lot about is the issue of consultation, about information and about engagement. Over the last 25 to 30 years, I've been involved in countless consultations within my community. We've been involved in consultations about apartment blocks. We've been involved in consultation about high-rise. We've been involved in consultations about parks, everything. Consultation isn't always easy. You put the information down. Everybody gets to base their ideas on the facts, not rumours, not innuendo, not by shit stirrers. You deal with the facts and you hammer out difference of opinion you have, and at the end of the day, you're in a better place. If I was to stand here now and say, the minister put in a high-rise building in our community and there was no consultation, isn't that terrible? People might cheer. If I was to say that they drove a road through one of our important green spaces with no consultation, everybody would cheer. In fact, if I was to say they tried to close down the cobblestone with no consultation, everybody would definitely cheer. But if I was to say, last week they were moving refugees into an office building in East Wall and there should have been consultation, nobody will cheer and everyone will be going, oh no, we can't have that, we can't have that. Why can't we have that? What's the point in consulting about things that we might agree on that might be easy if we can't consult on the things that are going to be hard on? That's the whole purpose of consultation. And I can guarantee, hand on heart, which is something I never do, I can guarantee, hand on heart, if somebody had to come into our community, spoke to the community leaders in our community, spoke to the community networks, and then spoke to the community, we would definitely not have had the situation we have now.
Okay, Padraig, what's your take on Joe's speech?
Well, I thought it was good. I mean, he's identifying from his position as a member of the community, that he's seen people coming in the last week or so that they're not from there, they're not people that live in the community, and he's talking about community issues that are going on a very long time in terms of infrastructure for the area, people that have been born and bred in the area who have been looking for accommodation as they grow up and move out, and hasn't been provided. So that gives you a context then to how the community seems to be getting affected by the imposition of what is in effect a direct provision centre, really, isn't it? Short term, they may say. So that's, to me, that's like the community side of it. He does allude to far right influences there. I've been watching this closely, and you can see some familiar faces that are associated with far right politics in the country. So it's not a conspiracy theory to say that there are people there pursuing it for those ends, and it doesn't sound like it's welcome in the area, and it shouldn't be either. But it is important that people differentiate the real issues from. We don't want this becoming something that goes around the country as some sort of a witch hunt. This is very much government policy that we need to look at.
I'm not confused in myself on this issue, but I'm trying to find the language, and sometimes I have to kick myself for maybe being overly sensitive, and maybe that the subject matter is just so sensitive that we can sometimes be overly sensitive with language and beat around the bush when it comes to people's right to define and influence and have input into their own environment and their locality, and indeed their surrounding culture that they've grown up with as well, without being perceived as particularly racist or feeling that they are in some way superior to somebody else. And I did mention last week and asked the question, what are the limits? And maybe to emphasize that question again, you spoke about areas having their population increased by 3%. I've heard that certain areas, small areas, have had their population, only because of small numbers in the first place, increased far more than that by the intake of asylum seekers, often just young male asylum seekers. So what is the limit? Is there a limit? And if so, what is the limit? If you were to live in a very small village, and tomorrow to waking up and find that your village is quadrupled in size in terms of population, all young males that don't speak English from a country outside of the EU, for example, do you still not have a right to have a say on that?
Like, I mean, if you look at
what's the limit? Is there a limit? Because my point is this, that even people who we would define as to be from the far right, they have a right to voice their opinion, so that people like yourself and myself can engage with them and say, okay, there may be issues here, but let's not suppress the conversation completely, so that ourselves and yourselves can have an open debate on this, so that we can actually identify what is based actually on hate, on the idea that there are people who through their genetic or their cultural backgrounds are more superior or are more inferior than others. And to be able to drag that out in a conversation that doesn't suppress people's right to say, well, I still would like to have an input into my environment. Am I, you know, I'm not sure. Are you getting my point?
I am, yeah. Like, there's a sliding scale, like, of extremism, and some people that attend these in the capacity of supporting, like, closing a centre like that, may not have the same extremist views as others that are there. It's just where they'll lead them to, like, you know, it's where it's what it breeds into society, you know. Like, people can be quite naive sometimes, feel like they're getting involved in what they see is right, you know, but it can just lead so ugly so quick, and this is the worry. And then when you look deeper into the politics of some of the groups that are there and what their actual philosophy is, you know, like, it can only breed problems.
But I also have to re-emphasize the point that when we just go far right, no right to talk, no right to speak, then that's when things turn nasty. But engaging the so-called far right and maybe actually agreeing on certain points, like, yes, the communities have a right to input, communities have a right to say whether they're going to double their population or whatever the case might be into the future, with young males and whatever the case might be, that people have a right to this more local democratic input into their surroundings, and to be not just consulted, but to have an actual say, because consultation can at times just be, in reality, be a delivering of an ultimatum and what's going to happen. You know, so a proper consultation process rather than just telling people what's going to happen, I think is important. Just moving on a little bit from this, the East Wall residents or group or representative group, I don't know if there's one or more of them at the moment, and I do know, as you said yourself, there are political organisations such as the National Party and Irish Freedom Party becoming more and more involved in East Wall. And so it's hard to tell what group is what, who's involved in what at the moment. But I believe that the statement that has come out from locals in their area who've come together. So this is the East Wall's local statement, in which they speak about having blocked the port tunnel in Dublin already on the 28th, and that they're going to do so again tonight. So we haven't had any reports just yet from that as we're recording.
I want to ask you, Taoiseach, about the
so this is the statement here. Press release: blockade of Dublin Port, schedule and plan going forward. Yesterday, November 28, 2022, we successfully blocked the port tunnel entrance into East Wall, backing commuter and commercial traffic up all the way back out to the M50 and beyond. This was a resounding success, and we would like to extend our gratitude to those who showed up yesterday evening to block the port. We would also like to extend our deepest apologies to those who have been affected by delays and backlog. Our actions are regrettable but necessary. We offered to work with the government on a solution, and they dismissed us. Their refusal to listen to us has forced our hand. Our protests will continue every Monday, Wednesday and Friday until further notice or until the provision centre is closed down. This is just a small taste of what's to come. Protests will escalate nationwide if the government does not close this centre in its entirety. Those affected by this can raise their concerns directly with those responsible for bringing about this desperate situation. Details for the culprits can be found here, and to provide a phone number and an email for Roderick O'Gorman, Minister, and Pascal O'Donoghue, another government minister. They signed it off for 𝐼𝐫𝐿, the East Wall Committee. The East Wall Committee, I think, through this letter are inferring that they are wider, or that they're involved in or will be involved in a network that is wider than East Wall. What do you make of this statement, Padraig?
Yeah, I had a read of it as well. Like, so they are calling for people to come in an individual capacity, but it does allude to a wider influx, you know. So, but like I do know a good bit about the history and politics of say somebody like Malachy Steenson. So I wouldn't have, like, he's a good community worker for a very, very long time. Like, so I would be slow to think that there's you know, something organized that's going to be discriminatory out of this. Like, so to me, I'm still happy enough that the intentions are good there, you know.
Okay. We just have one last video of Matty McGrath, TD from the west of Ireland, who was asking questions in relation to this overall issue of Roderick O'Gorman, Minister in charge of these matters.
I want to ask you, Taoiseach, about the situation regarding in East Wall and many other areas that's going on in this country with inward immigration. Now, the Irish people, as you know, have the kid in the forces and a thousand welcomes and very welcoming people. But when you see busloads of young men being arriving in an area in the dead of night and being put into industrial buildings, and we see it happening in different parts of the country, we need a proper debate here and a proper understanding and listen to communities, and not have the head of an NGO for dealing with refugees lecturing the community as to what they should do and how they should behave. I think this has gone out of hand, Taoiseach, and we need a major review of how this has been handled. I know you said that there should be consultation, in spite of what these NGOs, these highly paid NGOs, costing nearly $6 billion a year. They're running amok in this country, and they're treating the people like second-class citizens. We need to be, yes, we need a proper legislation on this, Lieutenant Governor, because we can't just sustain this. It's causing strife and angst for everybody, and we're trying to help people run a war, but these are not for Ukraine.
We're providing accommodation to 64,000 people right now, many of whom are from Ukraine, men, women and children fleeing the war there, but over 17,000 of which are men, women and children fleeing wars elsewhere. Because Ukraine is not the only war on our planet right now. There are wars in Syria, wars in Afghanistan, wars in Ethiopia and Eritrea. And just as much as Ireland offers protection to women and children, we also offer protection to men, because men are victims of torture, men are victims of persecution as well. So we won't make a determination on someone, whether we protect someone due to their gender. We'll make a decision in terms of when they've gone through an international protection application process, and a determination will be made at the end of that. Thank you.
What do you make of that, Padraig?
Well, just on the point of NGOs, there is too many NGOs that have big influence in how the state is run. They're not elected officials, and they don't answer to the people. And as we've seen for the last couple of years, there's been a huge problem with democracy and debate in the Dáil. Never mind having it in the local communities, where the local democracy that, let's say, the committees in East Wall would be able to engage and have some sort of planning input into the development of their area. Like, none of this is happening. So every single problem that you'll find, more often than not, the root of it is that we don't have democracy in the country, and you're seeing it there again.
Yeah. As well as that, you know, this complete reliance and this looking us square in the eye and telling us what we know is not true, that, you know, all of these people that have been brought in are fleeing wars and things like that, which we know is not true at this stage. Many of the people who've come into the country over the last few years I have got to know, and other people who are watching this, I'm sure, have got to know in a personal capacity, and we know their background, and they're open and honest with us, and they tell us that they actually came from the UK or they came from elsewhere. There's videos out there of people getting off buses being shipped in who are openly admitting that they've been living and working in the UK and other countries for the last number of years. So there are people who are seeking asylum. There are people who are seeking refuge, but there are a lot of people who are not. And as I say, it's facilitating an economic apparent necessity, according to the government, that we need to get more workers and more labour into Ireland. But this idea that we're children and we're not allowed to have an open discussion about our labour needs, and that everybody has to be sneaked into the country through a process that is not fit for purpose, in which more and more people are going to be pushed into this asylum process, into direct provision. They're going to be people who could be filling in our labour force, but instead are lingering in direct provision. And then there's people who need asylum, who actually are coming from horrible situations, whether it's women who are fleeing marriage vendettas in India and countries like that, and who will be murdered. And I have met women like that, and I have met women who've had acid thrown on their faces in provision centres. And quite often those genuine asylum seekers are left in the background, because the males that are coming over from other places as economic migrants, this has been an experience I have had, they're louder quite often. And the people who are genuinely fleeing torture and horrible experience in the past, they're more timid, and quite often they're in a state of trauma and shock, and they don't know how to put their hand out and be heard first. So I think we need to be honest that the asylum process is not fit for purpose. It's being abused, and it's abusing at the same time. Any final comments before we move on this subject, Padraig?
Yeah, so it's come up twice there. I made the point originally when we were talking about 𝐈𝐫𝐞𝐥𝐚𝐧𝐝 and his comments about that we kind of reached a capacity situation with what we have to offer. And it came up again with Joe Mooney when he was saying, why can't we talk about this? So like I think it is very important, and you're saying it there as well. We need to be able to talk about these things, because what happens when you have censorship is it goes into a back rooms where there's not proper discourse going on, and it can get very cultish, you know what I mean? So that's what we want to avoid.
And dependent on emotion rather than proper discussion.